You are incredibly clumsy.
Before we begin, I'd like to ask you for a small favor. I'm really hoping to break through the magical barrier of 1,000 subscribers. That number holds a special significance for me. Hit that subscribe button. It's just one click, but for me, it's a huge boost of motivation to create my next video. Thank you in advance. A millionaire recognizes his school friend working as a waitress, and what happens next will surprise you. Pick it up with your mouth if you have to, but you'll pay me back for that soup you spilled with your entire month's salary. You starving wretch. A servant like you isn't worth the plate she breaks. The woman's voice sliced through the restaurant's air like a knife, and every head turned towards the corner, where a waitress in a black apron knelt on the marble floor, cleaning up remnants of creamed corn with a rag. She wasn't crying. That was the strangest part. Anyone else would have begged for her job, but Renata Aguilar simply pursed her lips, took a deep breath, and continued cleaning with a dignity that seemed to belong to another life. Another time when she could never have imagined kneeling before anyone. El Faro Dorado was the most elegant restaurant in the southern part of Mexico City. Among its tables sat politicians, businessmen, and the wives of important men who came to be seen as much as to eat. That Thursday afternoon, the dining room was nearly full, and the waitress's stumble had become the free entertainment that this refined clientele secretly enjoyed. The woman shouting was named Lucrecia Montejo, and she wore a diamond ring on her finger, large enough to buy any of the waiters' cars. She stood up, smoothed her ivory-colored dress, and looked down at Renata with the kind of disdain one learns only from being born into the belief that the world exists to serve them. "Well?" Lucrecia insisted. "Are you planning to stay there all afternoon? Call your manager. I want him to know the kind of klutz he hires." "He's on his way, madam," Renata replied, her voice even. "I apologize. It was an accident. I'll replace your order immediately, on the house." "On the house?" Lucrecia let out a dry laugh. "What you owe me can't be paid with a bowl of soup, dear. You've ruined my dress. Do you have any idea how much this fabric costs? Of course you don't. People like you have never touched anything worthwhile in their entire lives." Renata finished cleaning and slowly straightened up. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in her green eyes. It wasn't anger, it was memory. The memory of a woman who had once worn dresses like that, who had had a surname that opened doors instead of closing them. But the flicker died as quickly as it appeared, because Renata Aguilar had learned, through hard knocks, that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "You are absolutely right, madam," she said softly. "I offer you my deepest apologies." And it was precisely at that moment, when the restaurant's silence was thickest, when everyone present waited to see how far the humiliation would go, that a man seated at the best table in the house, the one by the window, reserved only for the most powerful clients, looked up from his documents. His name was Maximiliano Cervantes. He was 42 years old, wore a tailor-made navy blue suit from Milan, a watch worth more than the entire restaurant, and a reputation that preceded him in every boardroom in the country. The king of real estate, the man who built towers where there were once vacant lots, the cold-eyed millionaire whom no one dared to contradict. Maximiliano had heard the commotion only partially, like one hears the buzz of a fly. But then the waitress's apologetic voice reached him, that serene voice that refused to crack, and something in his chest stopped. It was a voice he knew, a voice he hadn't heard in 30 years and yet had never entirely forgotten. He raised his gaze, and the world came crashing down on him. The waitress, standing in the middle of the dining room with her stained apron and her brown hair tied in a humble bun, was Renata, his Renata, the girl who had fed him when he had nothing, the only person in the world who had ever made him feel that he deserved to be loved. Maximiliano gasped for air. The document slipped from his hands without him noticing. The restaurant's buzz became a distant, muffled echo, as if he had been submerged underwater. Only she existed. That face that time had marked, but not destroyed. Those eyes he had searched for in dreams on more nights than he was willing to admit. "It can't be," he murmured. "It can't be her." Renata, oblivious to the gaze piercing her from the window, made a small curtsy and turned to get a new order. It was then, as she turned, that her eyes met those of the man in the navy blue suit, and she froze. The rag in her hand fell to the floor. Her lips parted. All the blood seemed to drain from her face at once, because she recognized him too. Despite the years, despite the expensive suit, Despite the hardness that success had etched on his features, she knew immediately who the man was who looked at her as if he had seen a ghost. "Max," she whispered, so low that no one could hear. "Maximiliano." The name escaped her like a prayer she hadn't uttered in half her life. For an eternal moment, they held each other's gaze over the tables of diners who understood nothing of what was happening. 30 years collapsed between them in a single second. Broken promises, letters that never arrived, a life that could have been and wasn't, there they were. She kneeling before the world, he sitting at the pinnacle of everything, and between them an abyss that seemed impossible to cross. "Is there anything else, Mr. Cervantes?" The manager's voice, Don Aurelio, broke the spell. He had arrived running, sweating. "Please excuse the commotion. The employee will be reprimanded immediately." "What is that woman's name?" Maximiliano asked, his voice hoarse, without looking away. Renata Aguilar. She's been with us for almost 2 years, sir." "Send her to the kitchen at once, and do not touch her," Maximiliano interrupted him. His voice held something so sharp that the manager took a step back. "Do not touch her. And that woman," he added, gesturing towards Lucrezia. "Bring her the bill. She is leaving now." "Excuse me, do you know who you're talking to?" "My husband is," Lucrezia burst out. "I know perfectly well who your husband is, madam, and I know he owes 3 million pesos to the bank I control. I suggest you gather your purse, your ring, and what little dignity you have left, and leave before I decide to collect it all at once." The silence that followed was so dense it could have been cut with a knife. Lucrezia paled, stammered something unintelligible, grabbed her purse with trembling hands, and fled the restaurant at a brisk pace, her heels clattering on the marble like a shameful retreat. But Maximiliano was no longer thinking about her. He stood up, left several bills on the table that covered 10 times the cost of his meal, and walked slowly towards Renata, who remained frozen in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. Each step he took was a journey into the past. He was once again the skinny, hungry boy from the neighborhood, the orphan everyone looked at with pity, the young man who had nothing but a pair of broken shoes and a dream too big for his shoulders. And she was once again the girl who had once extended a hand to him when no one else did. He stopped in front of her, so close he could see the lines that exhaustion had etched around her eyes, and her hands reddened by water and soap. And still, to him, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Renata," he said, his voice cracking on the last syllable. "It's you." "It's really you." Renata's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Mr. Cervantes," she replied with a thread of a voice, taking refuge in formality as one clings to a life raft. "I apologize for the commotion. It won't happen again. Don't talk to me like that." Maximiliano felt as if those words had plunged a dagger into him. "Not to me. Not after everything that—" "Please," Renata interrupted, and for the first time, her voice truly trembled. "Please, not here. Not like this. I have to work. I need this job. I need it more than you can imagine." And in those words, "I need it," Maximiliano heard an entire story of defeat and silent struggles that he didn't know. The heiress of the most respected family in his old neighborhood, the girl who had saved him from starvation, was now begging to keep a waitress job. Something broke inside him, and something also awakened. "All right," he finally said, taking a step back so as not to frighten her further. "I won't say anything more, but I'll be back, Renata. I'll be back tomorrow, and the day after, and every day it takes, because there's something I've wanted to tell you for 30 years, and I won't lose you again without telling you." Renata closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, tears finally rolled down her cheeks, but her voice remained firm. "People like us no longer live in the same world, Max," she said, using his name for the first time, and the sound of that diminutive on her lips was like thunder in the millionaire's chest. "What we were died a long time ago. Please, let it rest." She picked up the rag, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and returned to the kitchen with her back straight and her head held high, like a queen refusing to be dethroned even in exile. Maximiliano was left alone in the middle of the dining room, surrounded by curious glances, his heart pounding as it hadn't in decades. He watched her disappear behind the kitchen doors and knew, with a certainty that frightened him, that his life had just changed forever. What neither of them suspected yet, neither she, who believed she had lost everything, nor he, who believed he had everything, was that destiny had barely begun to weave its plot. Because between the past that united them and the present that separated them, there were buried secrets that would soon come to light. Secrets that would shake the foundations of everything Maximiliano Cervantes thought he knew about his own fortune. But that night, as he drove back to his empty mansion, Maximiliano could only think of one thing: the girl with green eyes who, one lifetime ago, had saved him from starving on the streets, and the debt he had never been able to repay, the forgotten debt. That night, Maximiliano Cervantes couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in the immense bed of his bedroom, high in a mansion that had 14 rooms and not a single person waiting for him awake. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Renata's face kneeling on the marble, cleaning up spilled soup with reddened hands. And then, unable to help himself, the memory would drag him 30 years back, to a time when he didn't have 14 rooms, but barely a corner in a borrowed room, and a hunger that gnawed at his gut like an animal. Maximiliano had been born in the poorest neighborhood in town. His father died when he was 6, crushed by a beam at the construction site, where he worked as a laborer. His mother, a woman sick with lung disease, washed other people's clothes to survive, until she too faded away one winter morning, leaving little Max completely alone in the world at the age of 9. From then on, little Maximiliano lived on charity and his own wits. He slept wherever he could, in the entryway of a church, under the river bridge, in the tool shed of a kind neighbor. He ate what he found in the market dumpsters, or what the cooks gave him out of pity. He went to public school with broken shoes and an empty stomach, enduring the mockery of the other children, who called him the beggar and pulled his hair. It was there, in that school, that he saw her for the first time. Renata Aguilar was the prettiest girl in the class, and also the richest. Her father, Don Ernesto Aguilar, was the owner of the largest furniture factory in the region. The Aguilars lived in the town's only 2-story house, complete with a garden, a car, and a maid who took Renata to school every morning. All the children flocked around her. Everyone wanted to be her friend. And yet, it was she who one day approached the corner where Maximiliano sat eating a piece of stale bread alone. "Why do you always eat by yourself?" the girl asked, looking at him with curiosity and not a hint of disdain. Max, embarrassed, hid the bread behind his back. "Because I like it," he lied. Renata tilted her head. She didn't believe him. The next day, without a word, she left a ham sandwich wrapped in paper and a red apple on his desk. The day after, the same. And the day after that. She never asked for thanks, never made him feel like a charity case. She simply treated him as an equal, as if he were the most normal boy in the world, not the orphan everyone mocked. "You don't have to feed me," Max said one afternoon, his pride wounded by someone who had already learned too soon what shame felt like. "I'm not feeding you," Renata replied with a mischievous smile. "I'm sharing with you. It's different. My mom says food tastes better when it's shared." Those words stayed with Maximiliano for the rest of his life. Over time, the friendship between the two children became inseparable. Don Ernesto Aguilar, far from forbidding it, opened his home to the little orphan. He was a man with big hands and an even bigger heart, who had built his fortune from the ground up and had never forgotten where he came from. "This boy has fire in his eyes," he told his wife, Doña Carmen, one day, watching Max help in the workshop. "He's hungry, yes, but not just for bread. He's hungry to be someone, and that, Carmen, you can't teach. That's something you're born with." The Aguilars practically adopted Maximiliano without any paperwork. They gave him a room in the back of the house, clean clothes, and hot meals every day. Don Ernesto paid for the boy's secondary and then high school education out of his own pocket, never asking for anything in return. He sat him at his table like another son. He taught him to read ledgers, to negotiate with suppliers, to shake a hand while looking someone in the eye. "Money comes and goes, Maximiliano," the old man would repeat. "What truly matters is a man's word. If you give your word, you keep it, even if it costs you your life. A man without a word is nothing, no matter how many millions he has in the bank." And while Don Ernesto molded the boy's character, something else grew in silence between Max and Renata. They were no longer children sharing a ham sandwich. They were two teenagers who sought each other out with their gaze, who laughed at the same jokes, who stayed late in the garden talking about a future they imagined together. One summer night, under the lemon tree in the courtyard, Maximiliano finally gathered the courage to take her hand. "Someday I'm going to be someone, Renata," he said, his voice trembling at 17. "I'm going to have my own company, my own money, and when I do, I'm coming back for you. I swear, I'm going to give you the life you deserve to repay your family for everything they did for me." Renata looked at him with those green eyes that haunted his dreams. "You don't owe me anything, Max," she replied. "And I don't need you to be rich. I just need you to be you. Whatever happens, promise me you'll never change. That money, if you ever have it, won't turn you into one of those cold men who only think of themselves." "I promise," he said, and kissed her for the first time under that lemon tree, his heart beating so loudly he thought the whole world could hear it. It was the happiest moment of his entire life, and also the beginning of the end, because a few months later, a letter changed Maximiliano's destiny. He had been accepted with a full scholarship to a university in the capital. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, the only way to fulfill his promise of becoming someone. Don Ernesto, with tears of pride in his eyes, hugged him like a son. "Go, boy," he said. "Go and conquer the world, but never forget who you are or where you come from, and come back for my daughter. She'll wait for you." The farewell with Renata was heartbreaking. They promised to write every week, to call, to count the days until they saw each other again. Max left for the capital with a cardboard suitcase, his eyes full of tears and his heart full of promises. But life sometimes has other plans. Maximiliano's letters began to arrive less frequently. His studies consumed him. Part-time jobs stole his hours and his ambition. That hunger to be someone that Don Ernesto had seen in his eyes began to devour him from within. Months passed, then a year and a day. The letters stopped arriving altogether. What Maximiliano never knew, what no one told him, was that during that time, a tragedy had befallen the Aguilar family. A tragedy so brutal it left them in absolute ruin, extinguished Renata's smile forever, and buried Don Ernesto prematurely. A tragedy that had a name and a surname, and which, many years later, would cross Maximiliano's path again in the most unexpected way. But at that time, trapped by his ambition, young Max only thought of succeeding. He told himself he would return soon, that he would make money first and then go back for Renata. "When I'm someone," he repeated, "when I have something to offer her." And so, postponing his return month after month, Maximiliano built an empire and let the most important promise of his life die. Now, 30 years later, lying in his empty bed, the richest man in the city understood with painful clarity what success had cost him. He had broken his word. He had done exactly what Renata had asked him never to do. He had become it. He got out of bed, walked to the window, and contemplated the city lights spread out at his feet like a conquered kingdom. He had everything a man could desire, and yet, he had never felt so poor as he did at that moment. "Don Ernesto," he murmured to the glass, as if the old man could hear him from wherever he was. "I failed you. I failed you and I failed her. But I swear, this time I'm not running away. This time I'm going to pay my debt, even if it's the last thing I do." Outside, the night was silent, and in some humble corner of that same immense city, Renata Aguilar was putting her little son to bed, kissing his forehead, and preparing for another day of work, unaware that the past she thought dead and buried had just awakened and was coming for her. The shadow of the past. Just as he had promised, Maximiliano returned the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Every midday, the millionaire's sleek black car would stop in front of the Golden Lantern, and Maximiliano Cervantes would enter in his impeccable suit and always sit at the same table, the one by the window, with a direct view of the area Renata served. He'd order a coffee, sometimes a dish he barely touched, and stay there for hours pretending to review documents he wasn't actually reading. His eyes followed Renata around the dining room, observing her every move with a mixture of tenderness and pain. Renata, for her part, did everything she could to avoid him. She asked her colleagues to attend to Mr. Cervantes's table. She changed shifts. She hid in the kitchen when she saw him arrive. But the restaurant wasn't that big, and sooner or later their paths would cross again. And then she would feel the weight of that gaze on the back of her neck, a burning ember. "That man is here for you," Doña Chayo, the cook, told her one afternoon. She was a plump woman, with quick hands, and an even quicker tongue, as she stirred a pot of mole. "Don't tell me no, my dear. He's been coming for a week, and he doesn't even eat. He just looks at you. I know men like that from afar. That one's soul is hanging by a thread. Don't talk nonsense, Doña Chayo, Renata replied, arranging some plates with more force than necessary. He's just an important client. Important, my foot, the cook snorted. Important clients come, eat, and leave. That one stays like a dog in front of a butcher shop. I'm just saying. And she let out a laugh that made the entire kitchen tremble. Beto, the youngest waiter, poked his head in with a mocking smile. Doña Chayo is right, Renata. Even I noticed, and I don't notice anything. That last part I'm sure of, said the cook, and the two burst into laughter as Renata fled the kitchen, her cheeks flushed. What none of them knew was that Maximiliano, during those days of silent observation, had begun to piece things together. A man with his resources wouldn't take long to find out what he wanted to know. A discreet conversation with Don Aurelio, the manager, and a few well-directed questions were enough for the millionaire to reconstruct, piece by piece, the life that Renata Aguilar's existence had become. And what he discovered broke his heart. Renata lived in a tiny apartment in a humble neighborhood on the other side of the city. She worked double shifts whenever she could. Every penny she earned went to two things: her mother, Doña Esperanza's medicine, an elderly woman bedridden with a heart condition that was slowly consuming her, and the expenses for her son, a 7-year-old boy named Mateo, bright and intelligent, whom Renata was raising alone. Alone. That word struck Maximiliano like a splinter. There was no husband, no father. Renata carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, without complaining, without asking for help, keeping her small family afloat with the only weapon she had left, her work and her pride. One afternoon, as Maximiliano was leaving the restaurant, he saw him. A boy was waiting on the sidewalk by the service entrance, sitting on a school backpack. He looked about 7 years old, with tousled brown hair and huge green eyes identical to his mother's. The little one was swinging his legs as he drew something in a worn notebook, completely engrossed. Maximiliano stopped. Something in his chest contracted. "Hello," he said, approaching cautiously. "What's your name?" The boy looked up without fear, with the frankness of those who haven't yet learned to distrust. "Mateo. I'm waiting for my mom. She works here, but she still has 2 hours, so I do my homework while I wait." "And what are you drawing?" "A building, the tallest in the world." Mateo showed him the notebook with pride. A crooked skyscraper, drawn in pencil, touching cotton-shaped clouds. "When I grow up, I'm going to build buildings so my mom never has to work again. She'll live on the top floor and see the whole city from her window." Maximiliano felt the air escape his chest. That boy, without knowing it, had just voiced the same dream he had at his age, the same fire in his eyes that Don Ernesto had seen in him so many years ago. "It's a beautiful building," the millionaire said, his voice hoarse. "And I'll tell you a secret. I build buildings." Mateo's eyes widened like saucers. "Really? The tall ones, the tallest in the city. And let me tell you something, Mateo. Yours will be better than all of mine, because you're doing yours out of love, and those are the ones that never fall." The boy grinned from ear to ear, and at that moment, Maximiliano understood he was lost, that there was no turning back, that that woman and that child had burrowed into his hardened heart and had no intention of leaving. But fate had a shadow prepared. Maximiliano. A sharp, perfumed voice cut through the moment like scissors. "May I know what you're doing talking to that thing?" It was Jimena Robledo. She got out of a red sports car, wearing a designer dress and dark sunglasses, that she pushed up just enough to look at the boy with a look of distaste, like someone finding an insect on their plate. Jimena was 35, a creature of cold, artificial beauty, with the ingrained certainty etched into her very pores that the world belonged to her. She was Maximiliano's fiancée, the daughter of one of the country's most powerful men, and the woman the millionaire was about to marry in a ceremony the press had already dubbed the wedding of the year. "Jimena," Maximiliano said, straightening up with a frigid air. "I wasn't expecting you." "That's obvious," she retorted, appraising the boy, and then the modest facade of the restaurant with the same disdainful grimace. "I haven't heard from you in days. You don't answer my calls. You're skipping appointments with the wedding planner, and now I find you here, in this dump, playing house with some street urchin. What's gotten into you, Maximiliano?" "Don't speak to him like that," Max said, his voice low but edged with steel. "He's just a child." Jimena let out a crystalline, venomous laugh. "Let's go. We need to discuss the altar flowers, and for heaven's sake, shower before dinner with my father. You smell," she wrinkled her nose, "like common food." She climbed back into her car, assuming Maximiliano would follow. But before he left, the millionaire crouched down in front of Matteo, who had witnessed everything with a furrowed brow. "Don't pay attention to that woman," he said softly. "Some people have a lot of money and very little heart. You, never be like them." "Okay. Okay," Matteo replied seriously. "My mom says the same thing. She says being rich isn't the same as being good." Maximiliano was speechless. That phrase, that exact phrase, the same one Renata had said to him under the lemon tree 30 years ago, struck him deeply. He straightened up, ruffled the boy's hair, and got into his car with a knot in his heart. What Maximiliano didn't notice, as he had already driven away, was that Jimena, before starting her car, had lowered her sunglasses and watched it all from a distance. She saw the tenderness with which Max spoke to the boy, the way his eyes softened, and something cold and dangerous began to stir within her. "Who are you, brat?" she muttered to herself, glancing at the restaurant door. "And who is the woman who raised you? The one who has my fiancé coming to this dive every day?" She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "I need you to investigate someone for me," she said with an icy voice. "A waitress at the Golden Lantern. I want to know everything about her. Where does she come from? What is she hiding? Who does she belong to? And I want it by tomorrow." She hung up, adjusted her sunglasses, and sped away, leaving behind a cloud of exhaust and a threat that neither Renata nor Maximiliano could possibly imagine. That night, Renata left work exhausted. She found Matteo asleep on her backpack and carried him in her arms to the bus that would take them home. The boy, half asleep, murmured against her shoulder, "Mom, today I met a man who builds tall, tall buildings. He said mine will be the best of all." Renata froze. "What man, my love?" "The one in the blue suit. The one who always looks at you." And as the bus rumbled through the dark city streets, Renata Aguilar clutched her son to her chest and felt, for the first time in many years, a fear she couldn't name. The past had returned, and with it, she knew deep down, the moment to confront everything she had fought so hard to leave behind would also arrive. The public humiliation. The following Saturday, the Robledo family hosted their famous annual charity gala. It was the most important event of the year for high society. An immense ballroom decorated with thousands of white orchids, golden chandeliers, a live orchestra, and a guest list that included the country's elite. Don Heriberto Robledo, Jimena's father, presided over the evening from a platform, a champagne flute in his hand, and the satisfied smile of someone who believes himself master of the world. What Renata didn't know when she accepted the extra shift that night was that the ballroom belonged to that family. The Golden Lantern had been hired for the service of Catherine and Don Aurelio. Due to a staff shortage, they had begged Renata to cover the event in exchange for good pay. She, who needed every penny for her mother's medicine, couldn't say no. So that night, dressed in the black and white uniform of the service staff, Renata Aguilar entered the world she had once belonged to by birth, but this time through the service entrance, carrying a tray of glasses. Maximiliano saw her the moment she entered the ballroom. He was arm in arm with Jimena, clad in a black tuxedo, surrounded by associates and sycophants, and upon seeing Renata, his champagne glass almost slipped from his hand. His first impulse was to approach her. His second, more painful one, was to restrain himself. If he revealed his feelings there, in front of all these people, he would only expose her to a pack of vultures. But Jimena had already noticed everything. She had kept the investigator's envelope in her vanity for 2 days. She had read it over and over until she memorized it. She knew who Renata Aguilar was. She knew about the sick mother, the child, the humble apartment, and the most delicious detail of all, she knew that this waitress had been born rich, the daughter of a ruined businessman, and now served drinks to survive. It was the perfect weapon, a bomb ready to detonate at the cruelest moment. And Jimena Robledo was an expert in cruelty. "Darling," she whispered to Maximiliano, taking his arm with an icy smile. "Come, I want to introduce you to some friends." She dragged him right to the center of the ballroom, where a group of ladies and gentlemen were conversing near the canapé table. And then, with a calculated move, Jimena raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Waitress!" she called, snapping her fingers at Renata. "Yes, you! Come here, bring the champagne. Renata approached with the tray, her head slightly bowed, not yet sensing the danger. Maximiliano tensed like a coiled spring. Look at her closely, dears, Jimena said to the group with a sweet smile and eyes full of venom. Don't you find it curious? This woman serving us champagne tonight was a rich girl years ago. Yes, you heard me right. The daughter of an Ernesto Aguilar, a provincial businessman who lost everything. How sad, isn't it? From society debutante to waitress, life takes such dramatic turns. A murmur rippled through the group. Some ladies brought their hands to their mouths, feigning sympathy while secretly relishing the spectacle. Renata froze, the tray trembling in her hands, feeling all eyes bore into her like needles. Madam, please, she said softly. I'm just doing my job. Oh, but how humble. Jimena let out a melodious laugh. Tell me something, dear. What does it feel like to have had everything and end up cleaning up after others? Do you regret anything? Or were you simply born for this? And wealth was just a fleeting accident? Enough, a deep voice intervened. It was Maximiliano. He had stepped forward, his face pale, his jaw clenched. The entire group turned to him in surprise. This is undignified, Jimena said in a tone that admitted no reply. Stop it. Undignified? Jimena looked at him, feigning astonishment, then smiled maliciously. Since when do you care about the feelings of the service staff, darling? Unless, she narrowed her eyes, savoring the jab, unless you know this woman from before. Do you know her, Maximiliano? The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Renata finally lifted her gaze, and her eyes met Max's. And in that look, there was a desperate plea. Don't do it. Don't betray me here. Maximiliano opened his mouth. He was about to shout to the whole world that yes, he knew her, that this woman was worth more than everyone present combined, that her family had saved him from starvation. But he saw the terror in Renata's eyes, and understood that defending her at that moment, in that way, would only feed the scandal and ruin her completely. I don't know her, he finally said, his voice breaking from within. But I know decency, and what you are doing lacks it. Jimena narrowed her eyes, disappointed at not getting the confession she sought, but she was unwilling to forego her spectacle. With an apparently casual gesture, she stumbled and bumped Renata's elbow. The tray tilted. Champagne glasses flew and shattered against the marble floor in a cascade of crystal and foam, splattering the dresses of several guests. But how clumsy! Jimena shrieked, leaping back theatrically. My dress! This useless woman ruined my $15,000 dress! Do you see? This is what happens when you hire just anyone. Call the manager. I want her fired right now. Renata fell to her knees among the broken glass, picking up the shards with trembling hands as tears finally escaped. Blood welled from a small cut on her palm. Around her, the guests murmured. Some laughed quietly. No one moved to help her. It was precisely the scene Jimena had orchestrated. Total, public, definitive humiliation. And then, amidst the embarrassment, a figure pushed through the crowd. Maximiliano Cervantes knelt on the floor beside Renata, to the astonishment of everyone present. The richest man in the ballroom, in his gala tuxedo, kneeling among the broken glass to help a waitress. Let me, he murmured, gently taking Renata's injured hand. Please, let me help you, Maximiliano. No, she whispered, terrified. You'll ruin yourself. It's not worth it for me. You are worth everything, he replied softly, looking her in the eyes. And I don't care what these people think. The entire ballroom erupted in scandalized murmurs. Jimena turned ashen, her mouth agape, watching her fiancé humiliate himself publicly for a servant. And from the platform, a figure observed the scene with an expression very different from the others. Don Heriberto Robledo had frozen, not from the scandal, not from his daughter, but from a name he had heard minutes before, a name that had awakened a ghost he believed buried forever. Ernesto Aguilar. The old magnate gripped his champagne flute so tightly his knuckles turned white. His face, previously satisfied, had turned to ash. He looked at the waitress kneeling on the floor, at those green eyes swimming with tears, and a cold sweat ran down his back. It can't be, he murmured to himself. The daughter of Ernesto Aguilar, here, in my house. Beside him, an assistant noticed his pallor. Are you feeling all right, Don Heriberto? That woman, the old man said with a hoarse voice, pointing at Renata, his entire voice trembling, not just his hand. I want her gone, kicked out of here tonight, and never to approach this family again. Do you hear me? Never. The assistant, confused by the vehemence of the order, nodded and withdrew. But it was too late. Maximiliano had helped Renata to her feet, had wrapped her bleeding hand in his own silk handkerchief, and was guiding her towards the exit with a protective arm, ignoring the stares, the murmurs, and Jimena's icy fury. Come, he said. I'll take you home, and never again, do you hear me? Never again will you have to kneel before anyone. As the ballroom doors closed behind them, Jimena stood trembling with rage amidst the broken glass, and Don Heriberto, from his platform, understood that the past he had tried so hard to bury had just returned from the beyond to collect a blood debt. What neither Maximiliano nor Renata knew yet, but would soon discover, was that the man who had ruined the Aguilar family, the man who had plunged Don Ernesto into misery and sent him to an early grave, was about to become, by the hand of destiny, Maximiliano Cervantes's father-in-law, and that the truth, that truth buried for 30 years, was about to come to light. The truth, buried that night after the gala, Maximiliano drove Renata home. The car glided in silence through streets that grew progressively darker and narrower, finally stopping before a peeling apartment building in a neighborhood where streetlights flickered and dogs barked in the distance. Renata's hand was bandaged with Max's silk handkerchief, her eyes red-rimmed from holding back tears. Thank you, she murmured, not daring to look at him. For tonight. But you shouldn't have done it. Those people won't forget it, and your fiancé certainly won't. Let them not forget, Maximiliano replied firmly. Renata, I need to go up with you. I need to see how you live. Please. She hesitated, but something in his voice, stripped of all arrogance, made her yield. They climbed a narrow staircase to the 3rd floor, and Renata opened the door to a small but impeccably clean apartment, filled with little details that betrayed the effort of making poverty a dignified home. In one room, on a modest bed, slept Doña Esperanza, Renata's mother. The elderly woman breathed with difficulty, connected to an oxygen tank whose hum filled the silence. Beside her, on a mattress on the floor, slept little Mateo, clutching his drawing notebook. Maximiliano felt his soul fracture. This was the Aguilar family. The family that had once lived in the only 2-story house in town, with a garden and a car. The family that had saved him from starvation, now reduced to an oxygen tank and a mattress on the floor. What happened to them, Renata? He asked, his voice breaking. What happened after I left? Your father, Don Ernesto. What became of him? Renata gently closed the bedroom door, not wanting to wake her mother, and sat exhausted in a kitchen chair. He died, she said simply, 22 years ago. But he didn't die of old age, Max. He died of sadness. He was killed? No, not with a gun, she clarified, bitterness in her tone. With papers, with lies, with the betrayal of a partner. A man came to town after you had already left. He gained my father's trust. He offered him a partnership to expand the factory, had him sign loans that seemed like a good deal, and overnight, everything collapsed. It turned out the documents were manipulated. My father lost everything, the factory, the house, his name. And when he realized he had been swindled, that a man he trusted had stripped him of everything he had built in his life, his heart simply broke. He died 6 months later. What was that man's name? Maximiliano asked, though a chill ran down his spine, a premonition of the answer. I don't know, Renata replied. I was a teenager. My mother never wanted to tell me his full name. She said that hatred only poisons the one who carries it. I only remember that my father, in his last days, repeated a surname in his delirium, a surname I never forgot. Renata looked up, her green eyes locking onto Max's. Robledo. The man who destroyed my family was named Robledo. The ensuing silence was absolute. Maximiliano felt the ground open beneath his feet. Robledo, his fiancé's surname. The surname of the man whose daughter he was about to marry. The surname of the father-in-law who had welcomed him into his mansion and treated him like a future son. He said nothing. He couldn't. He said goodbye to Renata with a mixture of horror and determination, promising to return, and left that humble apartment with one certainty: he had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. In the following days, Maximiliano became a different person. He canceled meetings, ignored Jimena, and sequestered himself with the best investigators and lawyers in the country. He had them unearth files from 30 years ago, commercial registers, old yellowed contracts, archived and forgotten lawsuits. And piece by piece, the truth emerged, cold and terrible. Heriberto Robledo, in those years, was not the untouchable magnate he was now. He was a hungry shark who built his fortune by devouring other companies. His method was always the same. He would approach honest but trusting businessmen, offer them partnerships, falsify debt documents, and then execute fraudulent guarantees to seize everything. Don Ernesto Aguilar's furniture factory had been one of his first victims. The cornerstone of his empire had been built upon the bones of the very family that had saved Maximiliano. But there was something more, something that left Maximiliano breathless. Among the documents, he found that one of the construction companies Heriberto had fraudulently absorbed decades ago was the same one Maximiliano had purchased years later to start his own empire. Unknowingly, the millionaire had built part of his fortune on the same dispossession. They were connected. Destiny had intertwined them in the cruelest way. Meanwhile, in his eagerness to be close to Renata, Maximiliano had begun frequenting the kitchen of the Golden Lantern during off-hours, dressed in simple clothes, without the staff quite believing who he really was. "All right, Garrido," Doña Chayo told him one day, placing a ladle in his hands. "If you're going to be here getting in the way, at least do something useful. Stir this mole, and don't let it stick. And don't put on that rich kid face. Everyone works here." "Yes, ma'am," Maximiliano replied, the man before whom entire banks trembled, stirring the mole with a smile he hadn't felt in years. "That's right," the cook approved. "See, you weren't so useless. Hey, what do you do for a living? You always look so elegant." "Office things," Max said evasively. "Numbers, contracts, boring." Doña Chayo narrowed her eyes. "Well, for someone from an office, you look at my Renata a lot. I'll tell you something, my son. That girl has suffered more than Christ. If your intentions aren't good, you'd better leave the way you came. But if they are good," her voice softened, "then here's a kitchen, a mole, and an old gossip who'll help you." Beto, peeling potatoes in a corner, let out a laugh. "Doña Chayo has already adopted you. Congratulations, Guerrero. You're family now. That means you get to wash the dishes." For the first time in a long time, Maximiliano laughed truly, a clean, uncalculated laugh. In that humble kitchen, surrounded by the aroma of mole and Beto's jokes, he felt more at home than in his 14-room mansion. He was, for a moment, the boy the Aguilars had taken in, the one who knew that food tastes better when shared, but the weight of the truth pursued him. That night, in his study, Maximiliano surveyed all the gathered evidence on his desk. The forged documents, the testimonies, the irrefutable proof that Heriberto Robledo had destroyed the Aguilar family and that his empire was rotten from its foundations. He held in his hands the power to destroy his future father-in-law, to bring justice, to return everything that had been stolen from Renata. But doing so meant breaking with Jimena, confronting the most powerful family in the country, and risking everything he himself had built. It meant choosing between the comfort of lies and the price of truth. Maximiliano picked up an old photograph from the archives. Don Ernesto Aguilar, smiling, standing in front of his factory, with a little girl with green eyes in his arms, Renata, and beside them, a thin, poorly dressed boy, smiling shyly at the camera. Him, the orphan that man had saved. "You taught me, sir, that a man without his word is nothing," Maximiliano murmured, caressing the photograph. "That if you give your word, you keep it, even if it costs you your life. Well, Don Ernesto, I gave you my word that I would repay my debt, and I will fulfill it." He clenched his jaw, locked the documents in a safe, and knew he had just made the decision that would change his life forever. What he didn't imagine was that while he was gathering proof to bring justice, an equally dark vengeance was brewing in the Robledo mansion, because Jimena had no intention of losing Maximiliano without a fight, and was prepared to destroy Renata Aguilar in the dirtiest way possible. Renata's pride. Maximiliano could not stand idly by. He knew that Doña Esperanza needed treatment that cost a fortune. He knew that every day that passed without that medical attention was one less day for Renata's mother. So he did the only thing his heart dictated: act. The next morning, without warning, he prepaid 6 months of treatment at the best cardiology clinic in the city and had a specialist doctor arrive at Renata's apartment with an ambulance, ready to transfer the elderly woman. But he had underestimated Renata Aguilar's pride. "Who authorized this?" she asked when she saw the paramedics at her door. Upon hearing the answer, her face hardened like stone. "Call Mr. Cervantes now." Maximiliano arrived half an hour later, convinced he would find her grateful. He found her furious. "How dare you?" she spat at him as soon as he closed the door, her voice trembling with indignation. "Do you think you can come here with your money and buy my life? Buy my mother? Buy me?" "Renata, I just want to help," he defended himself, bewildered. "Your mother is dying. I have the means to—" "I didn't ask for your help," she shouted, then immediately lowered her voice so as not to wake Doña Esperanza. "I didn't ask for anything, Maximiliano. I've spent 22 years supporting my family with these hands." She held them up, red and cracked from work. "With these hands, do you see? Not with handouts, not with the pity of the rich man who left one day and never returned. There lay the true wound, the one that had been festering in silence for 30 years. "Renata," Max murmured. "You left," she continued, tears now running freely down her face. "You swore to me under the lemon tree that you would return, that you would become someone, and come for me. I waited for you, Max. I waited while my father sank. I waited while we sold the furniture, one by one, to eat, until the house was as empty as a shell. I waited at my dad's funeral, dressed in black, looking at the door every time someone entered, thinking, now he'll come to save us. But you never came. I wrote letters that came back unopened. I called numbers that no longer existed. I asked about you to anyone I could, and no one knew anything. And one day, sitting on the floor of a room that was no longer ours, I understood the truth, that the boy I loved had died, and in his place, another man had been born, one who no longer needed me, one who had forgotten me." Maximiliano felt each word like a lash. He had no defense. He was guilty of everything she accused him of. "You're right," he said softly, his eyes moist. "In everything, I became exactly what you asked me never to be. I let ambition blind me. I told myself I'd make money first, then I'd come back, and the thens kept piling up until they became 30 years. I have no forgiveness, Renata. I know, but I swear I knew nothing of your family's misfortune. If I had known—" "What?" she challenged. "Would you have come? Would you have left your towers, your millions, your galas?" Maximiliano fell silent, because the truth was that he didn't know, and that doubt was the most painful proof of the man he had become. "Leave, Max," Renata said, exhausted. "Take your ambulance, your doctor, and your money. My mother and I are not a charity project for you to clear your conscience." "It's not charity," he replied with a new firmness. "It's a debt. Your family fed me when I was starving. Your father taught me everything I know. Paying for your mother's treatment isn't doing you a favor, Renata. It's the absolute least I can do to start giving back what they've given me. Don't deny me this out of pride. Don't let your mother pay the price for our past." Renata remained silent, trembling, torn between pride and her love for her mother, and in that moment, a tiny voice broke the tension. "Mom, why are you crying?" Matteo had emerged from the room, rubbing his eyes with the notebook tucked under his arm. Seeing Maximiliano, his face lit up. "Mr. Buildings!" he exclaimed, running towards him. "Look, I brought you a drawing!" "It's a building for my grandma with a garden on the roof so she can breathe fresh air. Okay?" The boy handed him the paper. Maximiliano took it with trembling hands. It was a lopsided skyscraper, with a tiny garden of flowers drawn on the rooftop and a smiling old woman in a window. Something inside the Millionaire definitively shattered. "It's the most beautiful building I've ever seen," he said, crouching down to the boy's level. "You know what, Matteo? Your grandma is going to breathe fresh air, I promise." And looking at Renata over the boy's head, Maximiliano saw how the walls of his pride were finally beginning to crumble. Not for her, but for his mother, for his son. Renata closed her eyes, nodded barely, and whispered a yes that cost her all the dignity in the world. That very afternoon, Doña Esperanza was transferred to the clinic. The doctors, after examining her, confirmed that the treatment had arrived in time. With proper care, the elderly woman could regain years of her life. When Doña Esperanza awoke in a clean, bright room, with white sheets and an attentive nurse, she looked at her daughter with eyes full of tears. "Who did this for us, my daughter?" she asked in a threat of a voice. Renata hesitated for a moment. "An old friend, Mom, someone the family helped a long time ago." Doña Esperanza, who despite her weakness retained her lucidity, smiled faintly and squeezed her daughter's hand. "The boy from the hunger," she murmured. "Maximiliano! I knew it the moment you said an old friend. Your father always said that boy would return, that he had a good heart, even if life hardened him. Don't judge him so harshly, Renata. Sometimes men get lost, but the good ones always find their way back." And, for the first time in years, Renata was able to sleep that night without the agonizing hum of the oxygen tank and without the constant fear of losing her mother in the early morning. But while Renata's life began to breathe, Maximiliano's entered into war. "Where have you been?" Jimena interrogated him that night, waiting for him in the living room of her mansion with a glass of wine and a sharp gaze. "The wedding is in 3 weeks, Maximiliano, and you disappear for days. People are talking. My father is furious, and I'm starting to think very ugly things." "We need to talk, Jimena," he said with dangerous calm. "About our wedding, about your father, about my father." Jimena narrowed her eyes. "What does my father have to do with this?" "More than you imagine," Maximiliano replied. "I've discovered things, Jimena. Things about how your family's fortune was built, and I don't like what I've seen." Jimena's face transformed. The mask of the enamored bride fell, and beneath it appeared something cold, calculating, dangerous. "It's because of her, isn't it?" she said with an icy voice. "The waitress, the dead man's daughter. You think I don't know, Maximiliano? But I know everything. I know you go to her hovel. I know you paid her mother's doctor. I know you looked at her like a lapdog at the gala." She stood up, spilling her wine. "You're going to throw everything away. Your position, your empire, our wedding, for a servant." "That servant," Maximiliano said, standing up too, his eyes blazing, "is worth more than your entire family combined. And I'll warn you about one thing, Jimena. Don't you dare touch her. Not her, not her son, not her mother, because if you do, you'll discover what I'm capable of." He stormed out of the mansion, slamming the door, and Jimena was left alone, trembling with rage, the red wine spilled on the white carpet like a bloodstain. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Dad," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "we have a problem, and its name is Renata Aguilar. Maximiliano is obsessed with her, and worse, he's poking around in the past." "In your past," she paused. "We have to stop her, once and for all. And I have an idea." Heriberto Robledo listened in silence. The mere mention of the Aguilar surname turned his stomach. He had spent 30 years believing he had buried that family forever, and now Ernesto's daughter had risen from the grave to threaten everything he had built. "Do it," the old man finally said, his voice like ice. "But make it look like an accident. Or, better yet, make it look like her fault. A thief, a woman without scruples. Drag her name through the mud, daughter. By the time Maximiliano opens his eyes, there will be nothing left of her worth saving." Jimena smiled, a smile that would have frozen anyone's blood. "Don't worry, Dad," she said. "By tomorrow, Renata Aguilar will be in jail, and Maximiliano will be back in my arms, begging for forgiveness." That night, as Renata watched over her mother's peaceful sleep at the clinic, she was unaware that a monstrous trap was slowly closing around her. The trap sprung on a Tuesday morning while Maximiliano was out of town. It was no coincidence. Jimena had waited for the exact moment Max traveled to the capital to meet with his lawyers, leaving Renata unprotected. And then she executed her plan with the coldness of a serpent. It all began with an anonymous call to the police. A woman's voice reported that during the Robledo's charity gala, a diamond necklace valued at 2 million pesos, a family heirloom, had disappeared, and that the main suspect was the service staff hired that night, specifically, a waitress named Renata Aguilar. What no one knew was that the necklace had never been lost. It was in Jimena's jewelry box, but her people had taken care to place a cheap replica of it, along with an envelope of cash, in the locker Renata used at El Faro Dorado. Planted evidence, a perfect conviction. That morning, two patrol cars parked in front of the restaurant. The officers entered. They asked to speak with Renata, and before the astonished eyes of all the staff, they opened her locker. There was the fake jewel that would pass for the real one, and the money. "Renata Aguilar, you are under arrest for jewel theft and fraud," the officer said, pulling out handcuffs. "What?" Renata paled. "I didn't steal anything. That's not mine. I've never seen this before in my life." "That's for the judge to hear." "Ma'am, wait!" Doña Chayo stepped in, ladle still in hand, fuming. "This girl is incapable of stealing a pin. I know her. There's something fishy going on here, gentlemen. It's a setup," Beto shouted, joining in. "Renata is the most honest person there is. You can't take her away like this." But the police, who had very clear orders from very high up, pushed the employees aside and cuffed Renata in front of all the restaurant patrons, who watched with murmurs and disdainful glances. The scene was exactly what Jimena had dreamed of. The final, public, irreversible humiliation. The cold metal of the handcuffs closed around her wrists. The same reddened hands that for 22 years had worked tirelessly to support her family. Renata felt her legs weaken, but she forced herself to stand tall. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break, even though her world was crumbling inside. "This is a mistake," she repeated, with a calm that cost her all her soul. "I've never stolen anything in my life. Investigate, and you'll see." "Everyone says the same thing," the officer replied listlessly, pushing her towards the door. "Please," Renata pleaded, as she was roughly escorted out. "My mother is in the hospital, very ill with her heart. If she finds out about this, it could kill her from fright. And my son gets out of school at 2 o'clock. He's 7 years old. Someone has to pick him up. He can't be left alone. Please, I beg you." "I'll pick him up, my daughter," Doña Chayo shouted, her eyes full of tears and her voice broken with rage. "I'll take care of Mateo, as if he were my grandson. Don't you worry about any of that. And hang in there. You hear me? Hang in there, Renata, because the truth always comes out. Sooner or later, it always comes out." Renata was put into the patrol car amidst the flashes of a photographer who happened to be waiting there. By the afternoon, her handcuffed face appeared on news portals with venomous headlines. "Waitress jewel millionaire at charity gala." The Robledo's machinery had done its work with ruthless efficiency. At 2 p.m., Doña Chayo waited for Mateo at the school exit. The boy recognized her and ran towards her, but seeing that his mother wasn't there, his little face filled with confusion. "And my mom?" he asked. "My mom always comes for me." "Your mom had to go out on an important matter, my little son." Doña Chayo lied, crouching down to hug him and hide her tears. "Today you're going to stay with me. We're going to make cookies. What do you think? Chocolate chip ones, the ones you like?" Mateo looked at her with those green eyes so much like Renata's. Those eyes that seemed to guess everything. "My mom is okay, isn't she?" he insisted. "Nothing bad happened to her?" "Nothing that won't be fixed, sweetheart," the cook replied, holding him tightly. "Nothing that won't be fixed." In the cold police cell, Renata Aguilar hit rock bottom. Sitting on a concrete bench, her uniform stained and her hands trembling, she felt 30 years of struggle crumble at once. She had survived her family's ruin, her father's death, poverty, humiliation. She had raised a son alone, cared for her sick mother, kept her head held high against all odds, and now they were accusing her of being a thief. They were taking away the only thing she had left: her name, her honor, her dignity. A woman detained in the same cell watched her for a moment in silence. "You don't look like a thief," she said. "You look like one of those who pay for others' mistakes. Many like you come here, girl. The rich never get brought in, only those who get in their way." Renata didn't answer, just pursed her lips and let the woman's words hang in the cold air of the cell, like a bitter truth she knew all too well. "What will happen to Mateo?" she murmured to herself, hugging her knees. "What will happen to my mother if I'm not here? Who will take care of them?" For the first time in many years, Renata cried without holding back. She cried for the rich girl she had been, and for the defeated woman they had made her. She cried for the father who had died of sadness. She cried for the boy who once loved her under a lemon tree and never returned. Meanwhile, in her mansion, Jimena Robledo uncorked a bottle of champagne. "To justice," she toasted. smiling as she watched the news on television. Goodbye, Renata Aguilar. Goodbye forever. Don Heriberto, beside her, nodded with grim satisfaction. Finally, the shadow of the past was buried again. Finally, the last Aguilar was paying the price. All that remained was to win Maximiliano back, make him believe that the woman he had lost his head over was a common criminal, and celebrate the wedding as if nothing had happened. But the Robledos had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated Maximiliano Cervantes. That same afternoon, as he drove back to the city, Max's phone rang incessantly. It was Beto. It was Doña Chayo. They were desperate messages. And when he finally answered and heard the words, they took Renata. They accused her of theft. She's in jail. The millionaire felt his blood freeze in his veins and then boil with fury. Repeat that, he said, his voice like steel as he pulled the car over. Who accused her? The Robledos, replied Doña Chayo, sobbing. They say she stole a necklace from the gala. But it's a lie, Maximiliano. I know that girl. They framed her. They planted it in her locker. Maximiliano closed his eyes. All the pieces clicked into place in an instant. The gala, the necklace, Jimena, her father. The warning he himself had given his fiancée. Don't you dare touch her. And she had dared. They had crossed the line. Listen to me, Chayo, Max said. His voice transformed. The voice of a man who had just declared war. Take care of Mateo. Don't let anyone near him. I'll take care of Renata. I swear on my life. She'll be free by tomorrow. And I swear something else. Those who did this will pay for every last cent they've stolen in 30 years. He slammed the accelerator to the floor. The engine roared on the dark highway. That night, as Renata sank into the despair of her cell, Maximiliano Cervantes didn't sleep. He gathered his army of lawyers, unearthed the safe containing proof of the original fraud, and began to weave, thread by thread, the net that would bring down the Robledo empire. For he had finally understood a simple, powerful truth. The money he had spent for 30 years building empires and buying loyalty now had a higher purpose. He would use it to seek justice, to repay his debt, to give Renata Aguilar back not just her freedom, but her name, her honor, and everything her family had taken from her. The war had begun, and Maximiliano Cervantes had no intention of losing. The revelation. At 6 a.m., Maximiliano Cervantes stormed the police station like a hurricane. He was accompanied by the 4 best criminal lawyers in the country, and a stack of documents that would make any judge tremble. In less than 2 hours, he had completely dismantled the charges against Renata. First, the forensic experts proved that the stolen necklace found in the locker was a crude replica made of cheap costume jewelry, while the original necklace remained safely locked away in the Robledo mansion's safe. Maximiliano had obtained this detail from a domestic employee fed up with Jimena's abuse. Second, the restaurant's security cameras, which the Robledos thought were disconnected, had captured an unknown man opening Renata's locker the night before the report and placing something inside. And third, that man, identified and pressured by Max's lawyers, confessed he had been hired by the Robledo family's head of security. The trap collapsed like a house of cards. When the cell bars opened, and Renata saw Maximiliano standing on the other side, his eyes red from sleeplessness, but firmer than ever. Her legs felt like they would give out. You're free, he told her, his voice thick with emotion. You're cleared. It's over, Renata. No one will ever touch you again, I promise. Renata took a few hesitant steps and, unable to help herself, collapsed into his arms. She cried against his chest, releasing all the fear, all the humiliation, all the pain of those eternal hours. Maximiliano held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, because to him, she was. Forgive me, he murmured against her hair, for not being there again. This time, I will never fail you again. As they left the police station, a surprise awaited Renata. Doña Chayo stood on the sidewalk, holding little Mateo's hand. The boy, seeing his mother, broke free and ran towards her, shouting, "Mommy, Mommy!" Renata fell to her knees and embraced him, showering him with kisses, tears, and laughter mingling. "I'm here, my love," she choked out between sobs. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, I promise." Doña Chayo made me cookies, the boy said, not fully understanding what had happened. "But I wanted you to be here, right? You're not going to leave anymore, are you?" "Never again, my darling, never again." Doña Chayo approached, wiping tears with her apron, which she hadn't even removed. "I told you the truth always comes out, my dear," she said, hugging them both. "And look who brought it to light." She gestured to Maximiliano with her chin, a sly smile on her face. The kitchen boy, the one who couldn't even stir mole, turned out to be quite the gentleman. Maximiliano smiled, touched. For a moment, the four of them, the cook, the child, the woman, and the millionaire, formed something akin to a family. But Maximiliano knew that freeing Renata was only half the justice. The other half, the larger part, the one that had waited 30 years, was about to be executed. That very afternoon, Don Heriberto Robledo was hosting a press conference in the grand hall of his corporation to announce a new business merger. Dozens of journalists, cameras, partners, and authorities filled the room. Jimena, radiant, posed with her father, convinced that Renata was rotting in a cell and that Maximiliano would soon return, repentant. The hall doors burst open. Maximiliano Cervantes entered with a firm stride, followed by his lawyers, a notary, and, to everyone's astonishment, Renata Aguilar, dressed simply but holding her head higher than ever. A murmur swept through the room. Flashes exploded. Don Heriberto turned ashen. Jimena dropped her father's arm as if it were burning. "Maximiliano," Heriberto managed, attempting a smile. "What a surprise. I didn't know you were coming. And what is that woman doing here?" "That woman," Max replied into the press conference microphone, to everyone's confusion, "is called Renata Aguilar, and I am here today to present before you all, and the press, a story that deserves to be told, a story of 30 years. The hall fell into absolute silence. 30 years ago, Maximiliano began, his voice clear and powerful, an honest businessman named Ernesto Aguilar owned the most prosperous furniture factory in his region. He was a good man, a man who, among many other good deeds, took in a hungry orphan from the streets, gave him food, shelter, education, and dignity. That orphan was me, the journalist scribbled furiously. Heriberto began to sweat. But one day, Max continued, a partner approached Don Ernesto, offered him a partnership, made him sign loans with manipulated documents, and then executed fraudulent guarantees to strip him of everything. The factory, the house, the name. Don Ernesto died of sadness 6 months later. His widow fell ill. His daughter, a girl who had everything, ended up working as a waitress to survive. He paused and fixed his gaze on Heriberto. And the man who destroyed the Aguilar family, the man who built his empire on that first scam, is here in this room today. His name is Heriberto Robledo. The outburst was deafening. The journalists surged forward. The cameras swiveled towards Heriberto, who had risen, red with rage. "This is slander," he roared. "You have no proof of anything." "I have all the proof," Maximiliano replied, with lethal calm. At a signal from him, the notary began to distribute certified copies to the press. Original contracts, expert documents proving the forgeries, testimonies, bank records, 30 years of fraud documented piece by piece. Heriberto took a copy with trembling hands, recognizing his own signature on the yellowed documents. Seeing Ernesto Aguilar's name written next to his, on a contract he believed destroyed forever, something in his face cracked. For a moment, the old magnate was not the untouchable shark, but a man cornered by his own past. "Ernesto Aguilar," he murmured, almost to himself. 30 years. I thought this was buried. "The dead do not rest when justice is stolen from them, Don Heriberto," Maximiliano said. "And that's not all." His voice hardened further. "Yesterday your family falsely accused Renata Aguilar of a theft she never committed. They planted false evidence, bribed a man to do it. Here is his recorded confession. And here is the security video. They wanted to bury the last Aguilar as they buried her father, but this time, I will not allow it." Jimena, cornered, tried to flee towards the exit, but 2 agents were already waiting for her at the door. "Dad, do something!" she cried. "Tell them they're lying." But Heriberto Robledo could do nothing more. The machinery of justice, which he had bought and manipulated for 30 years, was now turning against him. That very night, a court order froze his accounts and assets. Days later, father and daughter were arrested. He for fraud, forgery, and dispossession. She for slander, bribery, and false accusation. The Robledo empire, built on the pain of so many victims, crumbled in a matter of weeks. buried under the weight of its own crimes. Amidst the chaos that had engulfed the hall, Renata Aguilar stood motionless, her eyes brimming with tears. Finally, after 30 years, someone was speaking the truth aloud. Finally, her father's name was cleared before the world. Finally, the dishonor was shifting sides. Maximiliano approached her, ignoring the surrounding journalists, and took her hands. "Your father was a just man," he said. "Today, the whole world knows it, and the courts will return to your family every last penny they stole from you. The Aguilar fortune, the factory, everything that was yours, will be returned to your hands. I promised you, Renata, and this time, I kept my word." Renata looked at him, unable to speak, her heart overflowing. The man who had abandoned her 30 years ago had just restored her name, her honor, and her father's memory to her before the entire world. The debt was finally beginning to be settled, but there was one more debt, the most intimate one, the debt of the heart. "Why did you do all this?" she asked in a whisper amidst the din of the flashes. "You could have lost everything, your wedding, your position, your empire. Why?" Maximiliano looked at her with a tenderness he hadn't felt in decades. "Because you taught me long ago that being rich isn't the same as being good," he replied. "And because it took me 30 years to understand that all my fortune was worthless if I couldn't use it to repair the one thing that truly mattered." Outside, the entire city was beginning to learn the story. But for Renata and Maximiliano, the most important part was just beginning. Redemption. The months that followed changed Renata Aguilar's life completely. The courts, faced with the overwhelming weight of the evidence, ordered the full restitution to the Aguilar family. The stolen fortune, multiplied by 30 years of interest, returned to its rightful owners. The old furniture factory, still operating under another name, was renamed Muebles Aguilar, just as Don Ernesto had founded it. Her father's name, tarnished by ruin for decades, was cleared in the very newspapers that had once buried it. But what mattered most to Renata wasn't the money, it was seeing her mother recover. Doña Esperanza, with proper treatment, and finally free from the weight of anguish, improved day by day. She returned to sitting in the sun, to knitting, to telling stories. And one afternoon, watching Mateo play in the garden of their new house, she took her daughter's hand and said, "Your father would be proud, my daughter, not only because we got back what was ours, but because you never bent, not even in the darkest hour. That's not something money gave you, it's in your blood." Despite everything, Renata resisted opening her heart. Maximiliano had given her everything, yes, but 30 years of abandonment couldn't be erased in a week. And there was something else: fear. The fear of depending on a man, of losing the independence she had fought so hard for, of mistaking gratitude for love. Maximiliano understood, and for the first time in his life, the man who achieved everything through power and money decided to conquer with patience. He didn't overwhelm her with gifts, he didn't pressure her, he was simply there. She would go to pick up Mateo from school while she worked, because Renata, as stubborn as her father, insisted on managing the recovered factory herself instead of living off rents. She helped him with his homework. She taught him to draw real buildings with their columns and foundations. "You see, Mateo," she explained, pencil in hand, "a building doesn't stand because of how tall it is. It stands because of how deep its roots are, because of the foundations you can't see, like people." And Mateo, who had never had a father, began to look at Maximiliano with a new light in his eyes. One day, while they were drawing together at the kitchen table, the boy looked up and asked him a question that left him breathless. "Hey, could you be my dad?" Mateo asked with the frankness of a 7-year-old. "It's just that I never had one, and you teach me things, and you pick me up from school, and you make my mom laugh. Dads do that, right?" Maximiliano felt his throat close up. He put down his pencil, crouched down to the boy's level, and looked him in the eyes. "Mateo," he said, his voice trembling, "it would be the greatest honor of my entire life, greater than all the buildings I've ever built. But your mom has to decide that. How about we ask her together?" The boy nodded with a huge smile, and from the kitchen doorway, unseen by either of them, Renata heard the entire conversation, her hands over her chest, her eyes brimming with tears. In that instant, the last walls of her pride crumbled. One Sunday afternoon, Max took them to a special place. He drove for hours to the outskirts of the town where it had all begun. There, in a vacant lot where the old school once stood, Maximiliano had commissioned a small park, and in the center, freshly planted, a young lemon tree grew. Renata gasped. "Max," she murmured. "Under a lemon tree like this, I kissed you for the first time," he said, looking at her with his heart in his hand. "And under that same lemon tree, I made you a promise I didn't know how to keep. It took me 30 years, Renata, 30 years to understand that I left behind the only thing that was truly worth it, that I built towers that scraped the sky while the woman I loved was kneeling to pick up soup from the ground." He took a small box from his pocket, but when he opened it, there was no dazzling diamond ring, but a simple gold band, modest, almost humble. "I know I could buy you the biggest diamond in the world now," he said, "but you taught me that being rich isn't the same as being good. And I don't want to offer you my fortune, Renata. I want to offer you the only thing that truly belongs to me, the boy who loved you one day under a lemon tree, and who never, not a single day in these 30 years, stopped doing so." He knelt on the ground. "I'm not asking you to forget the past. I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life making amends. Will you marry me?" Renata looked at him, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Matteo, who was holding his breath a few steps away. She looked at the young lemon tree swaying in the breeze like a witness to time. And then, 30 years of pain, of waiting, of pride, and of repressed love broke like a dam. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Max, I will." Matteo let out a cry of joy and ran to embrace them both. And as the three of them melted into an embrace under the lemon tree, a simple and luminous truth filled Renata's heart. True love, real love, knows no time. It can sleep for 30 years, but it never dies. The wedding was held 6 months later, not in an ostentatious hall full of sycophants, but in the garden of the Aguilar house, surrounded by the people who truly mattered. There were no journalists, no cameras, no partners feigning affection. There were simple flowers, music from a local trio, and long tables that accommodated both old friends from town and the restaurant employees. Doña Esperanza, recovered, wept with happiness from the front row, wearing the same pearl necklace she had worn at her own wedding half a century ago. Doña Chayo, dressed in her best dress, organized a banquet that smelled of glory. "Because food tastes better when it's shared," she repeated, unknowingly quoting Renata's own mother. And Beto, a sea of tears, was in charge of carrying the rings, which he almost dropped 3 times, eliciting laughter from everyone present. Renata walked towards the altar in a simple white dress, and her hair down, without the humble waitress bun or the stiff hairstyles of high society, simply herself. And Maximiliano, as he watched her approach, remembered the girl who once handed him a ham sandwich wrapped in paper and understood that the circle, after 30 years, had finally closed. Matteo walked beside his mother to the altar, serious and proud like a little man. And when the judge asked who was giving the bride away, the boy stepped forward and said with all solemnity, "I am, and I warn you, sir, that you take good care of her, because my mom is the best in the world." The congregation erupted in laughter and applause. A year later, in that same house, a new life came to complete the family. A baby girl with green eyes, identical to those of her mother and brother, whom they named Esperanza, in honor of the grandmother who was still alive to hold her. Maximiliano, who for decades had been the richest and loneliest man in the country, found himself now in his early 40s, changing diapers and singing lullabies, happier than he ever thought possible. One night, late, Renata went out to the garden and found Max contemplating the stars, with little Esperanza asleep on his chest and Matteo leaning beside him, reviewing his drawings. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sitting beside him. "About your father," Maximiliano replied. "About Don Ernesto. He told me that a man without a word is nothing, that if you give your word, you keep it, even if it costs you your life. It took me 30 years, but I finally kept it. I paid my debt to your family." Renata rested her head on his shoulder and smiled. "You're mistaken, Max," she said softly. "You didn't pay any debt, because love was never a debt. My family didn't help you expecting you to return one day with justice and fortune. They helped you because you were a hungry child. And that's what good people do. Without accounts, without expecting anything." Maximiliano looked at her, moved to his very core. "Then, what was all this?" he asked. "Everything I did." "This," Renata replied, encompassing the garden, the children, the house, the life they had built, with her gaze. "It wasn't settling a debt, it was coming home. And far in the distance, in a corner of the garden, the lemon tree that Maximiliano had had transplanted from the town grew strong and green under the moon, laden for the first time with small fruits. As if time, after 30 years, had finally decided to give them back everything it had taken away. Because there are promises that destiny takes a long time to fulfill, but those born from a true heart, sooner or later, always find their way back home.